Good evening and welcome to the second of two Inside Government programs tonight for the fall 2021 semester here at KU Community College that are broadcast on Spectrum, Verizon, Fios, the Auburn Regional Media Access, better known as ARMA, as well as Win 89.1, the college's radio station. I'm your host, Guy Cosentino. Now that we have finished all of our forms for 2021 elections, we return for the next 2 weeks with our regular programming of Inside Government and Beyond the Front Page for the remainder of the semester, which is for telecom, is just about 10 days. Tonight we have invited Auburn City Manager Jeff DYGERT, our second Jeff of the night, for a city update that will include a discussion about the new landfill transfer station, the public safety building, as well as the financial outlook for the city, and a public apology from me to him, and you'll understand why in a minute. So, welcome back.
Well, thank you. You don't want to lead with that?
I will. So I moderated. I moderate here, but I don't ask questions here. So, as you were aware, 3 weeks ago, I moderated and asked the questions for the Wednesday morning roundtable, and I asked a question that apparently caused you some phone calls, and that was that you were not leaving the city as city manager. But there are times when city councils have to look for a manager, and what qualities and what would the process be. Apparently people did not hear the full question. So I want to apologize if anybody called you to say, when are you leaving?
Well, and I'm normally in attendance at those Wednesday morning roundtables too, and was not in that particular day. So I had no context to answer those phone calls. So it was interesting for a period of time.
So some people interpreted that you might be leaving the city of Auburn. You are not leaving the city of Auburn. Am I correct on that?
That is not that I'm aware of. Nobody's told me that.
Nobody's told me. But let me just say this. And I think I did say this during the question, you are, at this point, I believe, the second longest city manager the city has had. Bruce Clifford, you have to do 24 years.
Not sure I've got it in me.
Okay.
Not sure I've got that in me.
But you are, right now, the second longest serving city manager. When will you know when it's time to go, or do you have a plan, or?
There's a contract in place right at the moment, and
you have, what, 4 more years on your contract?
Yeah, about that, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, no.
So your plan is to stay at least before, and then you'll go from there?
We'll see how things go and see what folks think.
All right, well, let me ask you this. Okay.
And I had no idea of my standing in the history of things until somebody else brought it to my attention. So
you had a really good week last week. I think, so and I'll get to this in a second about what you did, but last week you unveiled the public safety building, which is dear to your heart as a former fire chief, also as a city manager looking at the long term.
It is and it isn't, okay? So I'd like to clarify that, because I know that there's people in the community that think that was a pet project because of my past, and it really is not. It's just another project that needed to be done, that had been talked about for years, and we moved forward on it. And
since at least 1992, I can tell you specifically.
Yeah, and I can recall a newspaper article, a citizen article, I believe it was 1991 was the date on that, and I went through some old paperwork today trying to find that. But I know it exists, where the council at the time was talking about a need for that station. So,
but I took
a long-term project that really needed to be done.
So forget your past history as a fire chief. I'm talking about, are projects like that what makes you want to continue as city manager? Is where I'm going with this question.
Well, I can tell you that recently in some interviews we did with some people for supervisory positions and things like that. One of the things that's interesting to me is that people in leadership roles, there's different types of personalities that get into leadership roles, and probably I think maybe the people that are more successful don't necessarily seek them out, but they like to solve problems, or they tend to be the person that somebody looks to solve problems, and I think that's kind of where I ended up in the position I'm at. Just always took an interest, looked beyond the scope of what my particular job or assignment was at any given time, try to see the big picture, try to figure out what's next and what we need to do to move forward and solve problems. And that certainly was a big problem, a big issue that needed to be addressed.
So before getting to that, what is the next big project?
Well,
I know you have some DRI, some downtown revitalization.
Sure.
But what's the next big city project?
Well, you know, if you look at the current fire station, it was built in about 1930, same time as City Hall, and the mayor has expressed an interest in doing something with City Hall to you know, and it's a process. As you know, it's a process. These projects don't happen. We don't dream them up and they don't just happen within months or even a couple of years. They typically take several years to plan and implement and fund. So City Hall, a renovation of that, a modernization of it.
So the Stowell sisters donated that in 1928, I think it was.
It's about a 1930s era building, about the same,
Osborne
about a year
sisters,
before the fire station, and it needs an update. We need to look at our public works facilities, and those are all topics that have been discussed for many years.
Because you've been in West Genesee Street almost 25 years, and that was, you know, a temporary plan 25 years ago.
Right. So all of these things, you know, we're constantly, staff is constantly keeping an eye out for potential programs that might open up where we have an opportunity to offset local costs by using state and federal funds, and that's what allows us to do these big projects.
So a big project is obviously Seminary Avenue in the fire department there. So how much did the facility cost in the end?
Overall, it's about $10 million.
And where'd you get the money from?
So we got some grant money from New York State, some of it through a DEC grant and some of it through the DRI grant, and then the rest was
DRI, for those who most likely
Downtown Revitalization Initiative. So it is one of the projects that has continued to move forward. The pandemic certainly slowed down progress on some of the projects, especially some private sector or not-for-profit projects that were out there, for obvious reasons, the financial uncertainty and things like that. But those are starting to pick up again now.
So of the $10 million, if I remember your math from the other day, I was thinking 3.5 to 4.5 came from outside of Cuyahoga County.
Correct, 3.2.
3.2. So is the 6.8 a bond that the city will pay out?
Yes, actually a little less than that, because some of what happened was done with some cash, you know, some funds that were already there, and like the land acquisition and things like that. And overall, that project actually came in about $1.5 million less than what the engineers and architects thought it would
originally.
Yeah.
And you're almost on time. I mean, and you said this nicely the other day, where a lot of projects came to halt, municipal projects in a lot of communities.
Yes.
You kept moving through, but you're not operational as we speak here on November 2nd. I drove by this afternoon before I came here.
In a pinch, it could be, but you know, we're going to take enough time to do things right and get things.
So what's left?
A lot of punch list stuff, you know, just minor things, finish, trim, paint, little things, touch-up
things. So firefighters are not sleeping there at this stage?
Not currently. Probably another week or two.
And then you'll be fully operational there?
Yes. Yep.
And so what is going to be there? I know there were 5 trucks. I think I saw 5 bays, if I'm counting right. 5 bays, and there were 5 trucks there.
So on any given days, there's 4 what we call in-service staffed companies, or what the public would know as a fire truck, right? There's 4 staffed fire trucks in the city, and 3 of those trucks will run out of there, and 1 will continue to run out of the Clark Street station.
So, and your plan is still to keep Clark Street, that it will stay there, and there's no plans, unlike Frederick Street, to close that.
Right. It offers us some flexibility with a variety of things, whether you want to, you know, discuss the strategic location related to the railroad tracks and the river and things like that, and just response times. It's
don't have a lot of stoplights down there.
Yeah.
No, you're not going to.
I'm not going to get into that.
That's where we'll wait till we get to the federal aid money. So one of the things that I don't think is going there is the ambulance service. Am I correct on that?
Correct.
So is it not going there because that was decided well after the plans were in place?
Yeah, a lot of things, if we could turn the clock back and know then what we know now, we probably would have done things differently. But, such is life and everything else. We couldn't have necessarily predicted COVID. Had we delayed the project to rethink things, had we delayed it for a variety of reasons, we likely could have lost some of those funds that made it an affordable project. And at some point in time, you just have to pull the trigger on a project and just say, okay, we're going. Because they're always, it's a dynamic, everything's...
So ambulance service will be run out of Market Street right now, correct?
Correct.
That was up and running as of midnight 2 days ago?
Sunday, Monday, the midnight there.
Midnight,
Sunday,
okay.
Monday.
So for those that, I don't think we've had you on here since before this was voted on. I think it was in the spring. Tell us about the ambulance service. What is it?
Again, there is some perception out there that was a harsh or rushed decision. It was not. That's another project that had been discussed for many, many years. Several studies had been done in the past, and I am fully of the belief that that is a type of service that should have some sort of local control and or oversight. Maybe I should say oversight rather than control.
So how will it operate?
It will operate. It is getting up and going kind of under some guidance, if you will, and some assistance from fire department staff. But the vision is it will be its own department. It'll stand on its own like the police department and fire department. It will be funded through the fees that are charged, not through taxpayer dollars.
So insurance fees?
Insurance, Medicare, Medicaid, those things will fund it.
Do you have any worries in the long term that if Washington or insurance companies restructure that could be a loss at some point?
There is that is a possibility. I don't think it's a probability. I think if anything happens, it may actually go the other way around, because what we're seeing across the nation is other communities struggling. I could just rattle off a bunch across New York State. I could rattle off a bunch across the country where ambulance service is at a critical point right now. We see what's happening with hospitals and staffing issues at hospitals. The same thing's happening with ambulances. The financial structure is strained for both. At some point in time, something has to give with the way these systems are structured, or we're going to have problems.
So how many ambulances?
There are physically 5 ambulances and 3 are staffed.
Okay, and so a staff of how large?
2 per ambulance.
And those are all city employees?
They are.
Did any of them come from the previous ambulance company,
Yep.
or are these people you had to go?
So we have people that have joined our ranks from both local private providers that provide ambulance service currently in the city of Auburn, or did provide service in the city of Auburn, as well from the region, outlying areas, certainly Onondaga County, some in Tompkins, some
So are
in
they
Seneca
provisional
counties.
employees in the sense that they have to take civil service tests? Or?
Right, so they are provisional in that sense. What is interesting is that the civil service test isn't a test as you and I would normally know it, or most people would know it. It's not like answer a question type of thing.
It's not a bubble test.
Right, it is based on their state certification, their Department of Health certification, and their length of certification. So it's just a combination of those two things that creates a scoring metric.
So you're waiting to get the scoring metric completed, but many of these people know where they are in the hierarchy.
Essentially, yes. Yep.
So going back to seminary, there's obviously still a building there that is not owned by the city, that is on the property, and I'm sure Joe Hucko and his team would be always willing to consider a price for that. Would you ever see, if the money became available from Washington or Albany, that you would move ambulance up closer there?
There's a possibility. Anything's a possibility at this point. We definitely.
But you can't put them currently right now into the current public safety building.
No, No.
It wouldn't work logistically.
It was not designed to house that many people.
So, going back again 2 years, the original thought, I think you were here on this show, I think other members of council, the mayor, was the hope that at some point on Market Street you might turn that over to a private developer, put apartments on the second, third, and fourth floor, or second and third floors, and then on the bottom retail. I think you and I had talked about what they had done out in Cooperstown, where they had a farmer's market and their old fire station. Is that off the table now?
Right at the moment it is. At the moment we're looking to expand police into some of that vacated space and utilize some of it for the ambulance. And of course it will all have to be, it's going to need an update as well to serve its new function.
Not that I want to just stay on public safety, but you do mention police, and I know one of the challenges you have had and the city has had and all law enforcement has been recruiting individuals into law enforcement.
Right.
You saw a slew of retirements in the last 5 to 6 months at Auburn Police Department, correct?
Yes.
On that? And part of that is because officers, and whether it's police or fire, their contracts are structured where really at the end of 20 years there are incentives for them to leave.
It's typically viewed as a young person's job because of the physical needs of the job, and that's why many years ago New York State and most municipalities or most states across the country have relatively early retirement.
Well, most of the people who retired in the last couple of months have been in their mid-40s.
Correct. Yeah.
And just so we say this for the record, Jimmy Sladen, Chief Sladen, is younger than I am, but he's still one of the older members of. He throws the average age off calculus because most of your road patrol are they're relatively new officers. Am I correct on that?
Yes. Yep.
So do you still have a vacancy issue right now?
There are a number of recruits or cadets in a variety of academies right at the moment. Once they get out and they do their supervised time locally, the ranks will be relatively filled at that point. So there's certainly many fewer vacancies than we had, but that's on a roster, right? So if you look at a roster, the positions are filled. The ability of some of those folks to actually fill a role individually is not there. So we still struggle a little bit with staffing because
they're
not out on their own.
Yeah. So does that mean your overtime costs are higher right now?
To a certain extent, yes. I couldn't give you a number off the top of my head, but.
So I know, in fact, Chief Sladen, when he was not Chief Sladen, was on this show before COVID with Chief Butler, and they were talking about recruitment back then. So this is 2+ years. They knew they were going to run into this problem.
Right.
So what are you and Chief Sladen looking to do for recruitment? Because you still have to recruit.
Yeah, and the police department has been working really hard to get out into the community and try to recruit locally. They've gone regionally and tried to recruit regionally, and I know that other departments are doing the same thing. When Chief Butler was here, he rattled a lot of folks when he rented a billboard or several billboards in the city of Syracuse to try to get lateral transfers from the city of Syracuse. And I think recently you may have noticed, I think it was the city of Cortland did the same thing in the city of Auburn.
So on the lateral front, how many laterals have you been able, because I know they were implemented in the 1990s and it got a really strong snapback from some people in the community that, why aren't you hiring our young men and women?
Right.
Have you had any success with laterals?
We've taken a handful of laterals, not an awful lot. There hasn't been a terrible, an extreme amount of interest in it.
So I want to talk about one other project that you've been working on, and that is the city's landfill transfer station. First of all, is the current landfill open or closed?
The current landfill is closed, and it is undergoing its official closure physically. There's contractors in there applying the.
So you have to cap it.
It has to be capped. It has to meet all sorts.
So where are you in that process?
They're wrapping up that process right now.
And when do you hope to have that completed?
I would think by the end of this year we should be in pretty good shape. And they put in test wells so that the
Because you'll have to monitor those test wells for years.
Decades, yes.
Yeah, so decades. Any idea how much this is going to cost?
Off the top of my head, I couldn't give you.
It is the cost of doing business of having a landfill, whether
right.
you had it.
So that was always an anticipated cost.
Right.
Always an anticipated.
So one of
cost.
the things that you did anticipate in closure is going to be building a transfer station for what purpose?
So the transfer station is so that we can continue to provide the service we provide the citizens and businesses of Auburn that get municipal trash pickup. Right. So we provide that service at approximately 25% of the cost of private haulers, and it's still a good service. It certainly comes into question quite often. Why don't we privatize? Why don't we privatize? And you know, when we compare the cost per household in the city compared to what our neighbors outside the city pay, it's a pretty good deal for our city taxpayers.
So where's the transfer station?
It's at the landfill.
And how much did it cost?
Again, you're asking me questions.
I thought it was $1 million roughly.
Yeah, thereabouts. It's really nothing fancy. It's
okay.
Just pretty much a big empty building with a platform where they bring the trash trucks that drive around the neighborhoods in. They dump the trash from those, and they load it into larger trucks, and then it's hauled out.
And where's it hauled to?
Seneca Meadows.
And what happens if when and if Seneca Meadows?
Then we shop around. And we shopped around before we went to Seneca Meadows.
So by not running the landfill anymore, does that mean you've been able to reduce staff?
Slightly. We ended up having to have drivers that drive the bigger trucks to Seneca Meadows. And that's, it was anticipated, but it's a glitch in the system. When a truck goes to Seneca Meadows, they can potentially wait for hours to unload.
Right.
So it was all built into the system. It was anticipated.
So you've had some reduction in expenses, but not significant.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So speaking of money, your first quarter is over for the fiscal year.
Yep.
About a month ago. Are your revenues on track?
Our revenues are doing well. Sales tax revenue, which is normally where everybody looks, is doing very well, but there's no rhyme or reason to it.
Well, I was going to ask you a rhyme or reason for one question on this was, could this be related to the increase nationally in fuel costs? Because the city does put a tax on fuel. It was implemented, I want to say, about a decade ago or more. Right. With fuel, you don't have a cap on, if gas goes to $2,
compared to $10,
you don't cap a
no.
percent. So could part of that be due to fuel costs?
It could, but our experience is that has not a major impact on things. And what we've been seeing is month-to-month fluctuations where there are times when compared to last year, which we weren't impacted by COVID nearly as drastically as some communities thought they would be. And we are seeing some months where we'll have a 30 or 40% increase in sales tax one month, and then the following month we have a single-digit decrease compared to the year before. It's very erratic right now, and I'm not sure how much of that has to do with the money that's been injected into the system, based on.
So people buy white goods and refrigerators, washers, dryers.
Right, and all the stimulus funding that went to individuals and families, certainly they spent that someplace. So we're being really careful not to, we're watching the numbers, but it doesn't really provide us with any good data to plan with.
Are you comfortable where you are on the expense side?
Yeah, our staff has, we've worked through this whole thing for 2 years now. Everybody tightened up their budgets really well, and had been for a couple of years, really keeping an eye on budgets, trying to keep things in line. But during COVID, things got tightened up more. We haven't really loosened up on those things at this point. We had to spend some money through COVID to provide services and to provide them in a way that we could with restrictions and things like that. But we're really taking a fiscally conservative approach to how we're paying the bills. And
So you are going to get some federal money.
Yep.
Do you have an idea of how much you're getting from Washington?
You're talking the ARPA funding?
Yes.
Yeah, so, you know.
COVID-related funding.
So that comes in a couple different tranches, and again, off the top of my head, I've got so many numbers rolling around in my head that, but about $20 million.
How will you spend that?
Some of it's been earmarked already for different programs and different funds.
And some of it can only be spent on certain areas, correct?
Right. So that is what we are still struggling with, right? So we have some basic federal guidance, but we don't have definite federal guidance. There are still many questions. Can it be used to
reduce taxes?
No.
So some of the decisions that you have to make will not be made between now and January 1st. A new council. You'll at least have one new counselor because Debbie McCormick's not seeking re-election
Very
today.
likely, yes.
So has your staff come up with a wish list?
Staff has come up with a wish list. Council responded with a wish list of their own, which was very similar to staff.
And both wish lists exceed $20 million?
You know, not so much. I think everybody came to, everybody was realistic about it. It's like, okay, here's this funding. How can we use this? How can we use it in a way that is impactful?
When will you have to make decisions by?
Some of those decisions have already been made. So approximately $10 million of that has been earmarked to go to certain places. It hasn't been spent yet,
right,
but it has been essentially set aside and set up for programming to do certain things.
So the other Jeff was here 30 minutes ago, and that was Jeff Parazola, and he is talked about how he's putting some of that stuff into staffing for a variety of reasons. You had a predecessor. I've mentioned Bruce Clifford already. This is his second time to be mentioned. When he was getting federal funds, would always put in non-recurring cost or capital improvements. Is that what you're trying to focus on? So
there are a number of things. We have the emerald ash borer and a tree program that's so big that our tree crew can't handle it. So I mean, things like that. Contracting out to help us deal with that and to replace those trees, right? So those are things that can happen. Trying to get money back out into revitalized neighborhoods and get money in the hands of homeowners so that they can, whether it's mortgage assistance or whether it's home repair assistance, things like that, so that we can improve neighborhoods that way. There are geographic restrictions on where some of these programs can be run, and then there are also income guidelines as well. Some of these things are dynamic. As a matter of fact, just a couple of days ago, there was some legislation on the federal level that was proposed to actually loosen up some of the restrictions on that funding.
So we have about 2 or 3 minutes left. I want to talk about two items that are pressing maybe as of right now. One is this issue of the marijuana opt-out. The city can restrict the sale of marijuana if it acts by December 31st, correct on that? They
could essentially prohibit dispensaries within the city.
And if you don't do this between now and October 31st, you can't revisit the issue.
Correct.
Some communities in Cuyahoga County have been having public discussions about this. They've acted on legislation. Is there going to be any action on the city council agenda between now and December 31st?
I do not believe so.
So does that mean by inaction they are agreeing to not opt out by default?
That's pretty accurate, I think, assessment.
So the last topic I want to really touch on is you're going to lose a city councilor. There's an election today. People have about an hour to vote if they haven't voted already on Tuesday. What are you going to do to bring at least one new member of council? We don't know if there'll be two, but one up to speed on what goes on at City Hall. What are you and staff preparing to do now, or are you preparing right now?
Well, the door is always open, as they say, right? So we have fantastic communication with the current council, both in my office and I think throughout all of our departments, the department head level. everybody's pretty much got an open door policy. It's respectful. It's
Is there specific training or things that you're
there are some specific trainings that are required of folks when they get into those elected positions, so we provide the support for that, and certainly the technical support that we need to do some of what we do, and then we avail ourselves to those counselors for getting up to speed. And there's
do you
certainly
expect
a lot
that once the election's certain, they'll be brought into executive sessions and whatnot?
It's been my experience. It's certainly not my call. That's the call of the council. But it's been my experience since I've been there that happens almost immediately. Yes.
We're going to have to wait till spring training to talk about double days.
Okay.
Up or down, were you happy with this year with your relationship with the double days?
I think there were a few bumps along the way, but we were still dealing with COVID. There were still a lot of things going on. I think overall it was a good experience for them. It was a good experience for me, and I think community-wise, I think it was a pretty good experience. I didn't hear a lot of complaints. I think the level of play was very similar. I think the feel may have even been better. I think some of the costs went down. Right, the cost for a family to go enjoy a game.
It was very fun.
Actually came down.
So they'll be back in the spring.
Yeah.
In June. We want to thank Auburn City Manager Jeff DYGERT for being here. We'll talk a little bit more about baseball if you'll come back in the spring to talk about where you are with the double days, and by that time where you will be with the COVID relief funds. But we do want to thank him for talking about city projects tonight. This Thursday we'll have it be on the front page with the new Executive Director of the Cuyahoga County United Way, Catherine Dennis. She'll talk about her new job as well as United Way's 2021 annual campaign that is now underway. We'll finish up on Thursday night with an Inside Government with Kathleen Cuddy, the county's public health director, to talk about not only COVID and the county's response to it, but we'll also talk about such things as the upcoming flu season. Next Tuesday, we will have back-to-back Inside Governments, the first one with Mayor Michael D. Quill and the second with Cuyahoga County Legislative Chair Aileen McNabb-Coleman. They'll give us county and city updates respectively. And we'll finish the fall season with 2 Inside Government shows next week. On Veterans Day, the first will be with Senator John Mannion, and then New York State Assemblyman John Lamadas. It is now about 8 p.m. on Tuesday night if you're watching this on Tuesday. Polls are still open in our viewing area for another hour. If you have not voted, what are you doing here? You should go to the polls. Go vote. Before we go, though, we would like to let you know that you can send your ideas for guests or questions for guests. The Inside Government will be on the front page. You can send them to cozguytho@aol.com. I'm Guy Cosentino for Cuyahoga Community College. I want to thank you for watching. We hope to see you back here in the studio on Thursday with 2 back-to-back programs as we are continuing our return to normal programming. But otherwise, we hope you have a good night. Have a great tomorrow. Be safe and be well. Good night.